There is a growing movement in philosophy to describe the universe as it exists entirely on its own, independent of human observation, language, or even our existence. Reaching this outside requires dismantling a deeply entrenched concept known as correlationism. This problem involves the limits of what we can claim to know. It asks if it's possible to ever truly access a reality that isn't already being filtered through a human mind. Ottavio Maciel examines this boundary, but he does so by looking past the technicalities of logic to see who the boundary actually serves. He traces a pattern where the abstract rules of knowledge begin to function as a geopolitical filter, deciding which cultures and which versions of reality are allowed to be considered true. This investigation suggests that correlationism is the structural logic required to maintain the singular global worldview of colonial modernity. The origins of this logic are found in the Enlightenment, when Western thinkers began to redefine the relationship between the mind and the world. Immanuel Kant's work in the late 18th century established the transcendental subject, a framework that placed the human at the center of all possible experience. This turn created a new rule. We can only know things as they appear to us, never as they are in themselves. Reality became a series of representations mediated by human consciousness or history. Under this constraint, it is impossible to think of an object without simultaneously involving a subject who is thinking about it. The subject and the object are fused. Within this logic, they can never be considered in isolation. This creates an enclosure. Anything existing outside this relationship is treated as unreachable, and therefore philosophically irrelevant. By making the human subject a mandatory filter, Western philosophy effectively fenced in the definition of reality. In 2006, Quentin Meillassoux' After Finitude launched a direct challenge to this enclosure. Meillassoux defines correlationism as the insistence that we only have access to the link between thought and being, never to either one alone. He points out that modern thinkers use this link to disqualify any claim to an absolute. An absolute is simply a reality that exists entirely on its own, with no need for a human to perceive it or give it meaning. If the human filter is required for something to be real, then the idea of a world that existed before humans is reduced to a mere concept. This creates a problem for science. It means that data about the pre-human universe, like the light from distant ancient stars, is seen as a human construction rather than a literal fact about the past. Meillassoux' goal is to find a way for philosophy to pierce this correlationist bubble. He argues that mathematics provides a language that can reach what he calls the great outdoors. He describes this great outdoors as a realm of hyper-chaos, a reality of absolute contingency that does not care about human logic. Meillassoux identifies the cage of correlationism, but his solution remains purely theoretical. He doesn't address the specific cultural history that built the cage. Ottavio Maciel shifts the focus. He moves the critique away from mathematical puzzles and toward the history of global colonization. Maciel argues that correlationism is not a natural boundary of human thought. It is a choice. He calls this choice a metaphysics of suppression. This suppression works by claiming that all of reality must be filtered through a single, universal type of subject. In practice, that universal subject is defined by the values and perspectives of modern Europe. This directly creates a monopoly on meaning. It dictates that anything that cannot be understood or categorized by Western standards isn't just different, it isn't real. What looks like a technical debate about epistemology is actually a mechanism for cultural and ontological colonization. We see the results of this suppression on this 1886 British Empire map, visualizing the world as a singular timeline of progress. Correlationism provides the philosophical groundwork here, denying the reality of any world outside the modern human framework. Distinct cultural realities and non-Western ways of being are compressed into this rigid line. Indigenous ontologies are labeled irrational because they don't fit the correlationist filter. This also applies to the non-human world. Ecological systems are stripped of their independent agency. Modernity insists these things exist only as resources for us. They have no independent history. The metaphysics of suppression erases a world of multiple existences in favor of a single, homogenized history. Decolonial critique completely breaks this correlationist enclosure. Thinkers like Walter Mignolo and Enrique Dussel propose a radical alternative, the pluriverse. Pluriversality allows for multiple, equally valid timelines and realities to exist at the same time. These different paths don't need to be validated by a Central European anchor. They function on their own terms. To defeat correlationism is to end the monopoly on reality, making room for a world where many worlds can exist. This leads to Maciel's final synthesis, complex realism. Complex realism recognizes that objects, ecosystems, and networks have their own independent reality and agency. A forest or a global communication network operates with its own internal logic and history, whether humans are there to observe it or not. This decenters the modern human. We therefore become just one mode of existence among many, interacting in a horizontal network. Ultimately, the vast universe is entirely indifferent to our human attempts to perfectly capture it within a single, isolated perspective. True decolonization requires stepping out of the bubble, abandoning the monopoly on meaning, and facing the complex reality of the world as it is.